Okay, so have you ever just felt like drowning in information? Like you're just bombarded with headlines and opinions everywhere you look, and it's just impossible to know what's actually true.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's like a constant struggle to figure out what to believe and what to ignore.
Exactly. Like how do we even know what to trust anymore?
Right. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. It's all about this fascinating thing called personal epistemology.
Personal epistemology. Now that sounds pretty academic. What does that even mean, like in normal terms?
Well, think of it like this. It's basically your own personal set of beliefs about what knowledge is and how you figure out what's true.
So it's like our own internal BS detector.
Yeah, you could say that. It's about understanding how you decide what's believable, where you go for information, and how certain you are about the things you know.
That's really interesting. So how do we actually learn about our own personal epistemology? Like, how do we get to know our own BS detector better?
There's this super helpful framework called the Bendixen and Rule integrative model of personal epistemology. Basically, it pulls together a whole bunch of research on how our beliefs about knowledge develop and change over time. And it's actually pretty mind-blowing.
Okay, that sounds promising. So what are the key things we should know about this model?
Well, first off, it all starts with what they call the mechanism of change. This is like the engine that drives how our beliefs about knowledge evolve. It's how we go from thinking one way to thinking a totally different way.
Okay, so what makes this engine run? What are the parts?
So there are three main components. First up is epistemic doubt. And now you might be thinking doubt isn't that a bad thing. But actually, Bendixen and Rule see doubt as a really important starting point for growth.
So it's not necessarily about being uncertain about everything. It's more about being open to questioning things.
Yeah, exactly. It's about those moments when you encounter something that challenges your existing beliefs, and you start to wonder if maybe you haven't been looking at things the right way.
Like when you read a news article that totally contradicts what you've always thought was true, it doesn't mean you immediately throw out everything you believe, but it makes you pause and think.
Right. And Bendixen found that this feeling of epistemic doubt, this willingness to question, it's actually a huge predictor of whether people will actually change their beliefs about knowledge. It's kind of like what Dole and Sinatra talk about with conceptual change.
Yeah.
You got to feel a little bit uncomfortable with your current understanding before you're really open to new ideas. But here's that catch. Doubt alone doesn't guarantee you'll actually change your mind.
Okay, so doubt is the spark. What's the next piece of the puzzle?
That would be epistemic volition. This is all about taking action. It's about actively choosing to engage with that doubt and figuring things out for yourself. Researcher Baxter-Magolda really emphasizes this idea of taking responsibility for your own learning and not just passively accepting whatever you're told.
So it's not enough to just go, maybe I should look into that. You actually got to put in the effort to research and really dig deep.
You got it. It goes hand in hand with what Corno, Sinatra, and Pintrich talk about with motivation and intentionality in learning. You can question things all day long, but if you don't have that drive to actually find answers, you probably just stick with your old beliefs.
Okay, so doubt makes you question. Volition gets you moving. What's the last piece of this change engine?
The final ingredient is resolution strategies.
Yeah.
This is all about how you deal with that doubt and that desire to find answers. Bendixen basically found two main ways we do this: reflection and social interaction.
Reflection, I can see that. It's like taking the time to really think things through, having that internal debate with yourself.
Exactly. It's about reviewing your old beliefs, figuring out what new information means for those beliefs, and then making a conscious choice about what you're going to accept as true. It really ties in with the work of folks like Baxter-Magolda, King and Kishner, and even Piaget, all of whom talk about how crucial reflection is for learning and development.
And social interaction, well, that's pretty straightforward. We learn by talking to other people, bouncing ideas off of them.
Exactly. Researchers like Kuhn, Lerner, Moshman, and Vygotsky have all highlighted how important social interaction is, especially when we're arguing and defending our points of view. When we have those debates with others, we're forced to think critically about our own beliefs, and that can really push us toward a more sophisticated understanding of knowledge.
So basically, the engine of change works like this. Something makes us question what we know. We feel motivated to find out more. And then we use reflection and talking to others to sort things out and maybe change our beliefs.
That's a perfect summary. But remember, this whole model isn't about moving through rigid stages. It's more dynamic and fluid, kind of like what Akins talks about with personal epistemology, as a system that's constantly being influenced by all sorts of things.
Okay, so we've got this engine of change that's driving how our beliefs evolve. But what are these beliefs actually about? What are the different ways we can view knowledge?
So the model says personal epistemology has multiple dimensions. Like there are 4 main areas where our beliefs about knowledge can differ: certainty, simplicity, source, and justification.
Okay, let's break those down.
Sure. So certainty is about how sure you are that knowledge is absolute and unchanging. Like, do you think there are definite right and wrong answers? Or do you see knowledge as something that's always evolving?
Okay, and then simplicity is about whether knowledge is just a bunch of facts or if it's more complex and interconnected.
Right. And then source is about where you think knowledge comes from. Do you trust authority figures, or do you see knowledge as something you construct yourself through your own experiences?
And lastly, justification is about how you decide what counts as good evidence.
Exactly. So you can see how all these different dimensions can create a really unique personal epistemology for each individual.
So, for example, I might believe that knowledge is constantly changing. It's super complex and interconnected. It comes from a combination of sources, and I mostly rely on scientific evidence and logical reasoning to justify what I know.
Exactly. And to illustrate how these different dimensions develop, Bendixen and Rule came up with this really cool metaphor: a rose bush.
A rose bush? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, imagine the rose bush growing upwards as your personal journey of understanding knowledge. Each branch represents one of those 4 dimensions of belief.
Gotcha. So some branches might grow faster than others or in different directions?
Exactly. And sometimes a branch might get pruned back, representing like a temporary step back in how you think about knowledge. But that pruning can actually lead to even stronger, more nuanced growth in the long run. So yeah, your beliefs in these different areas might not all develop at the same pace. And sometimes you might even revisit earlier ways of thinking before moving forward. This really lines up with Fisher's skill theory and Pintrich's connectionist theory. They also emphasize this kind of dynamic development that's not always a straight line.
I love that metaphor. So if we manage to navigate this engine of change successfully, what kind of beliefs are we aiming for? What do advanced beliefs look like?
Advanced beliefs are about moving away from that black and white thinking and recognizing that knowledge can be uncertain and messy. Baxter-Magolda described it as reshaping your assumptions about knowledge. You start to see that it's not about finding the one right answer, but about understanding the complexities and nuances of different perspectives.
So it's about being comfortable with not knowing everything, for sure.
It's about embracing that uncertainty and realizing that knowledge is constantly evolving. But even when we reach this more advanced way of thinking, and this is similar to what Dole and Sinatra found, we can sometimes slip back into old habits, especially when we come across information that really challenges us.
So it's an ongoing process, not a destination.
Exactly. And there's one really crucial element that oversees this whole process: metacognition.
Okay, so metacognition, that's about thinking about our own thinking, right?
You got it. It's like having this inner awareness of how you learn, how you evaluate information, and how your own beliefs might be influencing you. And the model suggests that the more you engage in metacognition, the more likely it is that any changes in your beliefs will stick.
So if you're good at metacognition, you're basically more conscious of how you're thinking and why you're thinking that way.
Exactly. And Hoffer actually went so far as to redefine personal epistemology as epistemic metacognition, highlighting just how central this idea is. And Akins raises this really interesting point about whether our beliefs about knowledge might actually affect how we engage in metacognition, suggesting there's this kind of back-and-forth relationship going on. And the emphasis on reflection in Baxter-Magolda and King and Kitchener's work also aligns perfectly with this idea of metacognition as a driving force in shaping our beliefs.
Okay, so metacognition is like the conductor of this whole epistemological orchestra. But what actually gets the music started? What triggers these changes in our beliefs?
The model points to 2 main triggers. First up, dissonance. This is what happens when you bump into information that just doesn't fit with what you already believe. King and Kitchener see these moments of contradiction as super important for how we develop our understanding of knowledge.
So it's like that feeling of, wait a minute, this doesn't add up.
Exactly. It's that feeling of things not making sense that can kickstart that whole engine of change we talked about, and connects with what Pintrich and his colleagues describe as feeling dissatisfied with your current understanding, that sense that something's off.
Okay, so dissonance shakes things up and makes us question what we know. What's the other trigger?
That would be personal relevance. So even if you're not hitting those jarring contradictions, things like having a personal stake in an issue, being super interested in a topic, feeling emotionally connected to it, or even just feeling confident in your ability to learn about it, can all drive this process of change.
So basically, if something really matters to you, you're more likely to be open to changing your mind about it.
You got it. And it's not always about those negative, this doesn't make sense moments. Sometimes it's just that pure passion and drive to understand something that pushes us forward. It's like what Haviland and Kramer found when they studied teenagers' diaries. Those kids who were genuinely interested in certain topics showed a lot more growth in their personal epistemology.
It makes sense when you think about it. We're more invested in things that matter to us. So how do our emotions fit into all of this?
Emotions are actually a huge part of the picture. The model emphasizes that personal epistemology isn't just cold, hard logic. It's a hot process, meaning our emotions are involved every step of the way.
So it's not just about what we think, it's also about how we feel about what we think.
Absolutely. Think about it, having your long-held beliefs challenged can be really unsettling, even scary. And as researchers like Bendixen, Hoffer, and Pintrich have found, strong emotions, both positive and negative, can influence whether we're open to changing our minds or whether we dig in our heels and cling to what's familiar. Haviland and Kramer also found that intense emotional periods often came right before big shifts in how teenagers were thinking about knowledge.
It's fascinating how much our emotions influence our beliefs. So what about the people around us? How does our social environment shape our personal epistemology?
Our environment, especially the people we surround ourselves with, plays a huge role. Think about it like this. We're constantly interacting with others, bouncing ideas off each other, and getting exposed to different perspectives.
Right, so our friends and family, our colleagues, the people we see every day, they all contribute to how we see the world.
Exactly. And remember, Piaget's theory of moral development? He believed that kids learn a lot about right and wrong from interacting with their peers because it's more of an equal playing field than with adults.
Right.
And Kruger found that kids are more likely to have those deep, thought-provoking conversations about moral dilemmas with their friends.
It makes sense. We're more likely to let our guard down and really debate things with people we feel comfortable with.
Right. And Vygotsky also talked about how important social interaction is for learning, especially when you're interacting with people who are more knowledgeable than you. And even Dole and Sinatra included the social context as a key factor in conceptual change.
So our peers can challenge us, introduce us to new ideas, and help us work through our doubts, but can they also hold us back?
That's a good point. While our peers can definitely push us forward, sometimes their influence can also lead to a temporary regression in our thinking, as Tudge found in his research. So it's really this dynamic interplay.
Okay, so our social circle is a big influence. What about our own brain power? Does our cognitive ability play a role in our personal epistemology?
Absolutely. The model really emphasizes that connection between our cognitive abilities and the environment we're in. Fisher's skill theory, which combines ideas from Piaget and Vygotsky, is super relevant here.
Remind me what skill theory is all about.
So basically, skill theory says that we develop skills over time that allow us to act in organized ways in different situations. And how skilled we are in a particular area really affects how we interact with and understand the world around us.
Okay, so we're not just born with a fixed set of skills. They develop as we grow and learn.
Exactly. And Fisher talks about two levels of skill. The functional level, which is what we could do pretty easily without much help, and the optimal level, which is what we can do on our own when we're really firing on all cylinders.
So the optimal level is like our peak performance.
Right. But here's the interesting part. We can actually push past our optimal level when we have support from someone who's more skilled than us. This is where Vygotsky's zone of proximal development comes in. He said that we can achieve more when we're working with someone who can guide us and provide that extra scaffolding.
That's really cool. So it's not just about what we can do on our own. It's also about how our environment can help us stretch and grow.
Exactly. And this idea of our cognitive abilities interacting with the demands of our environment is super important for developing a more sophisticated personal epistemology. King and Kitchener also talk about this, and Shammer-Akins points out how those external factors can shape our beliefs about knowledge.
Okay, so we've got this dynamic interplay between what we can do and the support we get from our environment.
Right. And the model takes this idea even further with the concept of reciprocal causation.
Reciprocal causation, now that sounds complicated.
It's actually pretty simple. It just means that our beliefs don't just get shaped by our environment. They actually shape our environment back. And they can even influence the beliefs of the people around us.
Wait, so my beliefs can actually change the world around me?
To a certain extent, yes. Think about Dickens and Flynn's work on IQ. They argue that your intelligence can actually shape your environment. For example, if you're really curious and intellectually engaged, you're more likely to seek out stimulating environments and surround yourself with other curious people. And researcher Judy Harris has talked about similar feedback loops in social development.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. And this brings us to what Rule calls the personal epistemology multiplier. The idea is that if something helps some individuals develop more advanced epistemologies, it can actually create a ripple effect that benefits the whole community.
So, like, if we teach kids how to think critically, it's not just going to help them individually. It could also create a more intellectually stimulating environment for everyone around them.
Exactly. And research has shown that even small changes, like encouraging kids to ask questions in school, can lead to big shifts in how they think about knowledge. Luca, Hoffer, and Shamir-Akins have all done work in this area. And if you can scale that up to a whole society, imagine the possibilities. We could see huge growth in critical thinking or good judgment, which is something that Kuhn and Weinstock are really passionate about. But they also emphasize that we need to create environments where people have opportunities to practice these skills and where critical thinking is valued.
That's a really inspiring thought. So to sum it all up, this Bendixen and Rule model gives us a really powerful framework for understanding how we develop and change our beliefs about knowledge. It's a complex interplay of our willingness to question, our motivation to learn, our ability to reflect and learn from others, our fundamental beliefs about knowledge, our awareness of our own thinking, the things that trigger change, our emotions, our social connections, our cognitive abilities, and even the way our individual growth can impact the world around us.
Exactly. And for all of us who are trying to navigate this overwhelming world of information, understanding these different pieces of the puzzle can be a real game changer. It helps us realize that learning and critical thinking are active processes, and that we have more control over how we form our beliefs than we might think.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm definitely going to be thinking about all of this a lot more as I move forward.
I'm glad to hear it. And here's something to ponder. Think about a time recently when you changed your mind about something that was important to you. What do you think played the biggest role in that shift? Was it a moment of doubt, a new perspective from a friend, a sudden realization you had while you were reflecting? And how might understanding your own personal epistemology, your own unique way of knowing, help you approach new information and make decisions in the future? It's a fascinating journey of self-discovery. And as we touched on earlier, this model also has some really important implications for education and how we can create learning environments that foster critical thinking. Maybe that's something we can dive into another time.
Yeah, definitely. There's always more to learn. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
It was my pleasure. Always
Sweet.
happy to chat about this stuff.